it seems as, many people on the journey, as they get older, the longer they've stayed in a fixed identity, the more it's like the more energy has accumulated towards and around the fixed self. Like the fixed self has attracted more volume, more gravity, more mass, more construct. It's actually more alive, in a fixed state. And so they're even more resistant to change, more, worried about a psychedelic journey that might, cause a death, or even a reevaluation of ideas, or, reevaluating their political opinions, or any other anything they really push against, because they have so much gravity and energy associated with the fixed self of the ego.
There's so much invested, right?
Yeah.
There's so much evidence. And that's hard to give up. I mean, I see this when I work with my athletes who are in transition from being a pro performing athlete who's under the lights to somebody who's retiring and quote unquote a relative no name. Nothing's actually happened in the physics of a human being performing over here and then maybe being more of a stay-at-home dad, but in the psychology of how he or she views themselves as no longer of the same worth or the same value. That's devastating to the ego that desperately is holding on to an image of like past success. And this is what we see also, I think, with menopause, and, it tends to be around that age where a lot of the kids leave the nest and the mother has lost her sense of worth. She hasn't actually lost it. It's perceived, because there was this, I had a position of service that gave me some value. And now it's like, well, what do I do with myself? And there can be this depression because there isn't this sense of contribution to something which we're all designed to want to have. So this topic, I didn't know this is where we're going to go today, but it's just, I love it. Like I love death. I mean, it's one of my favorite topics to speak to because it is inextricably connected to aliveness. And yet right now, everybody's desperately trying to avoid it. And as you were saying earlier, those who hold on the most furiously to their identity become the most rigid in life, both physiologically, emotionally, and psychologically. We see this as people grow old, they become sort of very stuck in their ways, like physically, and then they become very stubborn in their opinions. All that is just the callousing of a narrative that was, first of all, unconsciously created as a reaction to any sort of external fears and threats, that then was a mechanism to try and preserve oneself. And they're still in the bunker of their own narrative, wondering why they don't feel vitality and joy and love and intimacy with people.
So it's like those old etch-a-sketches with the little knobs that create a little thing. It feels like the more time we spend on the little knobs creating our little creation, before there comes a shake, which shakes it and allows us to recreate ourselves. The more attached we are to our little geometric design we created, making little right and left turns and building this thing. What is your mechanism besides just downloading the advice? Like, do you have a mechanism for helping people just fucking shake the etch-a-sketch?
That's what I do. I get them to stand up and wiggle, shake the shit out of them. You just see all these pixels fall down. I'm like, how are you feeling? They're like, oh my God, I don't know who I am, but I feel so free. There is a mechanism, and to what degree it's just intuited now. I mean, I just listened to somebody's story. We've done it a couple of times with you, on air, which has been beautiful, where I just listened to someone's story. So I can hear what someone's telling me, and I know it's not who they are because I know who they are, right? So I'm listening for the pretense. I'm listening for the illusory idea of myself and the story of woe that belongs to their vision of who they are. So if I can just very gently, with some sort of white gloves on, carefully take them back to the idea of themselves that has them believe that they have a problem, the symptom of woe, and then just investigate the validity of that idea, then they're like, oh, wait a minute. No, I'm not not good enough, or no, I'm not not loved. But I've got the evidence for when my dad said this or my mum did this or whatever. So once we uncover that subconscious dialogue, see it for what it is, which is it's a falsehood, then whatever they thought was their problem, which only exists by virtue of that narrative, that just dissolves. So instead of trying to solve anxiety, I don't deal with anxiety, I don't deal with depression, I don't deal with addiction, I don't deal with financial or relationship problems. These are all symptomatic. These are all access points for me to be able to go, oh, hang on a minute, if you have X problem, then what that reveals for me in the way that I listen is that you must have a deeper conversation about how you view yourself, and that's where you're confined. People go through life as prisoners of their mind. The only prison anyone lives in is their own perspective, their own point of view. And if you can crack that, there is no greater gift. There's no greater sense of liberation and freedom than to be able to help somebody see the prison they live within, that they superimpose onto circumstance, but really as a reflection of the conversation they've had inside of them, usually for decades. And to break that apart, that's recoding that really is the ultimate emancipation of suffering.
Absolutely. So we're talking about one of the primitive drives of an entity, an organism, survive.
Yeah.
There's another one that I've been tracking and can see it in self as well, and that is to grow, right? Like any plant, there's a drive to grow. There's a reason that the grass wants to push up from the soil. The tree wants to spread its branches.
Yeah.
The human wants to acquire more wealth, more followers, more platform, more influence, more, like there's this drive to grow. And with the human psyche, when we're starting to measure that and chart that, and we also like the acceleration of growth. I think that's something else we're attracted to. But there's going to be periods of entropy, periods where things are not going to be growing. Things are going to be actually shrinking. And that can be difficult for, the organism to handle, the human to handle. And I've noticed that myself. Like everything feels good when it's on a nice bottom left of the graph to top right of the graph chart. But when, my business, sales were growing year after year, and then we had a dip one year, and I was like, oh, fuck, we're not growing anymore. Or that'll happen on a podcast or any other thing, any other metric by which I'm measuring by. Yeah. And I think it certainly happens to the perception of beauty or attractiveness. It's like, I'm getting hotter and hotter and hotter. Oh no, I think I peaked, and here goes my hair. Yeah. And now here goes, here comes, like my six pack isn't there and I can't lift as much. So how do you help people deal with grace, with that, with these kind of lulls, and even maybe even speak to that attraction to growth, and then the grace to deal with things when they're not glowing or we're perhaps on the decline?
Yeah, I mean, I think words is, words are very important. Obviously, it's the medium I traffic in. So even when you're talking about growth, I would speak more to expansion. So growth, in Ayurveda, there's 6 stages to disease, which is part of my work, right? The Ayurvedic healing methods. And so growth, the first stage of disease is accumulation. So we could say a tumor grows, because you're sort of implying that growth is good. But it depends in what context. So growth to me, I hear as a manifest expression of something, right? Whether it's, your bank account, oh, that's good. Or it's a tumor, that's not so good. But the energy of growth is still present in both. So beyond anything that's happening in the external manifest world, I would look at what's occurring internally in terms of my ability to expand. So that's the growth of consciousness. That's the growth of awareness. That's the growth of love. That's the growth of presence. Yeah. So it's a different form of growth that is not based on anything that by design is physical in nature. So then as you see your company grow and then you see this dip and you said, well, that reveals you, not what's going on out there, right? That reveals fear, right, concern. This is bad, right? Maybe, it's relative to what? Like, who knows, right? So this is staying in that I don't know mind versus the I know mind. The know is grabbing, it's holding, it's stuck. The I don't know is pure possibility. So the more that I can step into that space of uncertainty continually is the degree to which I'm in a place of expansion. And then life is just unfolding. Bank account goes up, goes down. Like, okay, whoop-de-doo, right? That can only be a concern if I have the concern. It's not out there. It's got nothing to do with the actual numbers in, my account. It's got to do with my response to it. How do I dance with that? How do I relate to that? Which is the revelatory nature of life. That to me is why we're here in this paradigm. It's not to make more money or, get more status or to keep the six pack or to keep the hair or like that. It's just to what degree do all of those transactions reveal something about your own sense of fear and inadequacy? That's the lie.
Yeah, it seems like, and I think that really points to the key here, is that we get attached to these fickle external metrics as a measurement of, quote, growth. Whereas what you're talking about, what's the expansion of your consciousness? What's the expansion of your awareness? What's the expansion of your love, your heart, your intellect, all of these things, which actually can and should expand, barring some kind of physical injury or some, age-related cognitive decline that's beyond your control. That's another thing to deal with. But that's not what I'm particularly talking about. What I'm talking about is how we get attached to these external things, which we then use as mirrors to reflect upon our own validation, when really we're looking again at the wrong thing. We're not looking at the intangible essence expansion. We're looking at the metric growth of something that we have attributed some value to, which doesn't belong there.
Yeah. Well, and it's like all it is really, coming back to the kids' comment about the two of you, it's just a security blanket. What is that ego? Because one of the tenets of the ego's existence is insecurity. So if who I am and the way that I relate to myself is feeling that essence of insecurity, then by design, a behavioral adaptation, something that I pursue, has got to be some security. And we find security in all sorts of ways, right? Predominantly through finance, through some relativity to a person, like if we have a partner, if we have a company, we find some sense of security. But it's transitory, it's illusory, and ultimately it will dissipate. So real security, true security, is when I can sit in the absence of needing security. That's the real secure essence of who I am, in the absence of anything that would pertain to human security, because that is always going to be, at best, transitory. So that is real expansion, is when I become associated with my true nature. It's no longer dependent on anything that is outside of me. That is, for me, the quintessential expression of success, is I'm at peace regardless of circumstance. I am not at the effect of circumstance. I am cause in the way that I experience myself in life, regardless of what's happening around me.
Yeah. And it's an absolute self-defeating prophecy, because we are so good at just assimilating and creating a tolerance and an expectation, even if we are growing. And let's say we're growing again, and we've also kind of, diverted that paradigm into something more productive. But even still, just to show how futile this is, if you're growing at a certain pace, at a certain while, you just expect that pace of growth. So even if you're still growing, but it's not at the same pace, and I think we measure it in exponential terms. So if you start with $1,000 and then you make, get up to $10,000, well, that's a $9,000 actual or arithmetic increase, but it was a 10x of your former amount of money. So then it requires another 10x for you to get that same feeling. So then you have to get to 100,000. Then it requires another 10x. You got to get to 1 million. And then we're talking growing by 900,000 instead of 9,000 to get the same feeling that you formerly had. And we get attached to this. And then if that doesn't happen, we feel this sense of disappointment, but it's Sisyphean. It's going to end at some point. We're never going to be able to grow at that same exponential pace, because there's a finite amount of resources. If we're measuring in the finite, there's a finite amount of resources in the universe. At a certain point, Kanye West can't get 7 billion followers. He might get 1 billion, but at a certain point, he's going to fucking run out. And if he's attached to that rate, he's fucked.
Yeah, the one word I hear and I feel in the way you describe that is exhaustion.
Yeah.
This is why most people are exhausted. Their adrenals are shot, their Hashimoto's, all of the things that people struggle with, the anxieties, the sort of deleterious effects on their physiology, where they're just sort of in this process of degeneration because people are chasing the proverbial carrot in whatever form represents, success, security for them. So whether he gets 7 billion or 1 billion, my question would be, could you be totally free and at peace whether you had one or, none? It doesn't really matter. That again, it's like we're so ingrained as human beings to think that life and success and security are all outside of us. And so it's only logical that if how I feel is a byproduct of my circumstance, that in order to feel good, I'm under the impression that I have to control circumstance, right? That's just a logical extension. I feel good when circumstances are good. I feel bad when circumstances are bad. wow, well, let me solve this problem. I just got to constantly control circumstance. But that's why I said the word that comes to mind is exhaustion. Like that is so tiring. It's the metaphor or the analogy I use with all my clients is, imagine you're in the middle of Phoenix and it's July, or it's the middle of the summer and you're in Phoenix and it's 120 degrees out. You're driving a car. It's a nice car. It's got a good AC. And you're under the impression that in order for you to feel comfortable, you have to crank the air conditioning with the windows rolled down, because in order for me to be okay, I have to make everything outside of me okay. Now you start to see the futility of that. Like, I'm trying to cool down the whole of Arizona in order to be comfortable. Right? How's that working out?
Yeah.
Whereas I'm like encouraging people, roll up the windows, put on a nice little bit of like, whatever your tune du jour is, and stick your 68, 69, and life is good. So that, people, it's an example, right? It's not about, oh, well, that's so selfish, but you could also invite people into your space. You become a source of aspiration and inspiration, right? To continue the metaphor. So that to me is what people are doing, is they're desperately trying to control circumstances under the impression that if I get everything perfect in the way I want it, then I will finally be at peace. And this is why we have this one-day illusion, right? Like, this isn't my life right now, but wait, I'm getting there, which then creates this psychological time. Everything that we think we want is out there somewhere, right? In the future. But I mean, have you ever been in your future? It's like, how's that? Like, what a ridiculous idea. Like, no, I'm going to be really happy in the future. Okay, well, when were you last there? I mean, right? It's nuts, right?
Yeah.
So can you find this sense of like true affinity for the circumstances of your life now and recognize this is it? This is where I'm at. And the degree to which I resist that is the degree to which I suffer. And the degree to which I suffer is the degree to which I create desire, which creates time. And now I'm under the impression that in order to mitigate my suffering, I have to be out there somewhere in the future when I get everything in order. I mean, talk to your doctor and have another cocktail, right? I mean, it's like, you wonder why people are always trying to escape stuff. It's can you just be where you are and recognize you're not under threat? Now, I'm not obviously belittling that some people truly have situations that warrant some kind of survival, right? Like whether it be shelter or food, like that definitely exists in the world. I'm speaking to most people who are at least getting food on the table. They have some sort of roof over their head. It doesn't have to be like the Ritz, and it doesn't have to be like Nobu sushi, but
or even somebody like, I got in a fucking nasty car wreck, and there was some days there where my face was on fire, and like of course, it will feel better in 2 weeks. And actually the external will affect my physical pain threshold. And that will happen to any of us. But what we're talking about is the everyday existence in this place where we place our salvation in the external world and think that that's going to influence the internal. And it's not the case. Like what you're teaching, what I'm supporting, what Joe Dispenza, who I talked to yesterday, what we're all talking about is the sovereignty of our internal landscape and reclaiming it. It's the same thing that Viktor Frankl was talking about 70, 80 years ago.
Right.
The last of the human freedoms is the ability to control one's internal circumstances. Right?
Yeah. And again, this is where there's a lot of compassion, because until you're aware of those mechanisms, people talk about choice and, it's up to you. It's how you react. Well, did you have choice in this trivial disagreement, with your wife? I mean, there's figurative choice and there's literal choice. I would say at that moment, you had no choice. You were just being driven by the mechanisms of the narratives that drive you and the way that you try to preserve your own identity and be right about it. Like that, but that warrants compassion and forgiveness. Now, post-trivial disagreement, you can start to have a conversation and a dialogue about it and go, wow, what was that? I got hurt because of whatever she did or said, and vice versa. Where does that come from? What was I actually interpreting that event or those words to mean about my own preservation? Because it's always a perceived threat. That's all it is. It's a perceived threat. To what? To your identity that is desperately trying to hold on to whatever it thinks is right about life and how she should or life should act. Right, so that's post. But when you're in it, that it does warrant compassion and forgiveness, because you're being driven by a pattern. It's not a powerful choice. No one's going, like in 5 minutes, I can't wait to get anxious.
Yeah.
That would be somewhat conscious. Like anxiety arises, because you have a dance and an interaction with the way that life is unfolding that is unconscious. And for that reason, we want to bring, I feel, the eternal maternal energy of love to hold someone. When you fall over and you have a boo-boo, you got hurt in this argument. You know, what you're really looking for is to be held, to be cradled. It's okay. Come here, honey. It's okay. Then we can sort of bring in the paternal and like, okay, well, what actually happened there? Like, you didn't get stabbed, like, but you kind of acted like you did. You know, it's right? The metaphor of a brick in a house, like I talk about, you throw a brick into the ocean, you're going to get, precisely based on the laws of physics, the splash and the sound that is totally in correlation with the size and the speed and the weight of the brick. You throw a house into the ocean, equally the same principles of physics apply, right? The same, it'll be a bigger splash, it'll be a bigger sound. Most people react to life like a brick comes at them, but they react like it's a house, right? So now you have no longer, you've lost your relationship to the actual unfolding objectively of life, and you're actually revealing, where am I under some sort of duress because I feel my identity is under threat. That's where the work of liberation, and to go back to my point about expansion, that's where it lies. Somebody who's very, very tight psychologically, it doesn't take much to piss them off because they don't have any threshold. Right? And that's why one of my questions is, can I be with this? Is an expression I use for myself. What is happening? What did they say? What news did I get? Can I be with this? What does that mean? Can I stay centered and at peace regardless? Now, I'm still human. I'm still a work in progress. There might be certain things that trigger, but to me, I don't see it as something to be defensive about. I see it as an opportunity for more awareness. Oh, wow. Why was that something that I got a little bit triggered by? That's the opportunity. And it's a different reframe. Instead of trying to control that, make them wrong, tell them to go fuck themselves, or whatever it is that we do when we feel threatened, it's like, okay, why in the infinite power of my true essence do I feel so scared in this situation? Because that's not me. That's a lie. Thinking that I'm not okay with what happened, or I'm not going to be okay, meaning it's a threat to my existence, that's a lie. So there's the opportunity is, okay, thank you, life, for revealing somewhere within me that I'm still holding on to something that is self-preserving in nature, which does not serve me.
Yeah.
Right?
One of the interesting phenomena is this kind of necessity for time, because we don't like to acknowledge that we're wrong immediately, because we're still so in the identity of the one who wants to be right at that point. But given enough time, we can go back and say, oh yes, that was the me of 7 hours ago. And the me of 7 hours ago was a bit foolish, but the me of now is wise.
Yeah.
Right. But we have this illusion of time that's necessary. And I know I'm thinking of one friend in particular where he's very comfortable acknowledging where he was wrong a month ago, 6 months ago, a year ago. Oh yeah, back in those days. But he has to have a large expanse of time, not even a day, not even an hour, but like a really large expanse of time. So he's put enough distance in his own mind to justify, oh, I'm different now. So I can totally acknowledge that I'm wrong then. But if you try to call him out on something that he's wrong about now, it's just resistance to the, he'll fucking bring all the swords out and fight to the death to preserve his rightness in the moment.
Yeah.
And then you come to him 6 months later and he'll be like, oh yeah, that was me then though. I wasn't as conscious as I am now.
Right.
And it's this trick we play, and it's a trick with time. And I think the elegance of actually being able to admit moment by moment and realize every single moment is an opportunity to be different. We don't need to wait a perceived amount of time to put distance to allow our own mental construct of the amount of time it takes to be a new person. It could happen like this. Awareness can happen 5 seconds after you said some stupid shit to your partner or to somebody and be like, oh, wow, that was dumb.
Yeah.
And you can be a totally different person right then. There is no time associated with these constructs that we make up in our mind, because they're not linked to the physical body. Yeah, the physical body may take 40 days or however long it takes for cells to turn over, or 7 years. I don't know. I've heard a bunch of different things. But ultimately, like, our psyche can change in a snap if we're willing and just understand that, oh yeah, okay, that was me of 5 seconds ago, and I am now the me now.
Yeah.
And I forgive that me of 5 seconds ago, and please, I ask your forgiveness for the me of 5 seconds ago. I'm really sorry.
Right.
And we can do that quick.